So from an outside perspective, and somebody that lives in the UK, I think it's entirely reasonable that everybody in the US appears to be totally pissed off with their healthcare system, particularly this whole business of having to get insurance and then being denied claim. But what's more interesting to me is, one, that it unites the left and right, and secondly, that actually this is just the tip of the iceberg. So I'm going to talk about what else might be bubbling away under the surface, and then I'm going to ask the question, why is there an iceberg in the first place? So when we look at the stock price of United Health Group, it's definitely gone down, but I mean, not by much, 10% or something, so I'm sure they'll weather it. And looking at the rest of the healthcare plan sector, there is a dip, but it doesn't reflect there's going to be some change, and therefore this is going to be not as profitable anymore, according to investors. And Yahoo Finance is telling you to go buy in this sector for most of them. So I'm, at the moment, don't believe that anybody seriously thinks it's going to actually change. I can also see from how much you spend per capita that spending 286 billion circa, where you were in 2022, from the average around the other developed nations, money is coming from every American's pocket and it's going into a small number of Americans' pocket, and we'll talk about all that in a minute. I went and looked for the chart on United Healthcare's denial rate. I can't seem to find it, but I found this, and it sort of tells a slightly different picture. So whatever, United Healthcare, they're part of a bunch of people that are all doing the same thing to you. So if we look at the top 10 complaints by category, you'll see that healthcare comes a lowly 8 in the list from the Consumer Federation of America, an organisation that apparently has an adversity to graphs. My point here being that all of the current vitriol towards healthcare, and yet it's only number 8 in the list of things that piss everybody off. So this is the measure that most people use to look at the health of the economy in the US, and you can see that by and large that's continued to go up since, well, forever, with the obvious dips of 2008 and during COVID. I'll come back to this chart in a minute. The next thing that sort of most people look at is the employment rates, and they seem to be pretty reasonable. Again, it spikes with stock market crash 2008, and in COVID it's been on a downward trajectory. So you can see public debt has risen coincidentally in line with the stock market rise, and interest payments are $800 billion a year. But you do have a money printing machine, and so it isn't actually the problem that everybody thinks it is until it gets to a point where confidence in the US dollar means that your currency crashes. I think you're quite a way away from there, so you can continue to keep printing money. I mean, that's the main thing, but at some point you won't be able to. But I also think that this isn't the reason why people vote for change. Some of the things that really are affecting people are things like consumer price index and inflation, which has risen significantly, not as a result of COVID money, but as a result of input costs going up. I think the real problem, and this is the problem for the US and all other Western economies, is this: income inequality leading to wealth inequality. It's not difficult to understand this. The bottom 50% earners, they have a smaller salary and potentially they have interest payments to service debt, so their net income is small in comparison to somebody that has larger salary, but mainly their income comes from assets they own. So they have stocks and shares, they have properties, and they're able to generate income in the form of dividends and interest, visibly reflected in the net wealth. What's interesting about this is that curve is almost identical to Dow Jones. Every time you see Dow Jones industrial averages going great guns, you can basically assume that what that means is that the wealth inequality is increasing. If we line up everybody in the US by net wealth, we can plot several known points. The curve therefore looks something like this. So I wonder if this was in any way what was originally intended. Every single business that is funded through some form of equity, i.e. every large organisation, must generate a return on investment, which can only come from one of two places: increase in revenue or cost reduction. So what we're going to look at is, okay, what are some of the negative consequences of this, basically? So every large business wants repeat customers, and therefore they engineer their product to fail much, much earlier than they necessarily need to. This causes additional burden in terms of mining rare resource and completely ignores the fact that we don't have infinite supply of everything. Who hasn't been overcharged for something? Yeah, the medical industry seems to be particularly good at ripping off their customers. So look at the fourth one down, $40,000 for a file of whatever it is. And this is, I guess, their way of making their money back on the stuff that doesn't come to market. But it seems massively unfair on the people that have got diseases or illnesses that these drugs treat. Everything that's online now trying to get you to subscribe to free trials so that they can basically assume you're going to forget about cancelling the membership and carry on a monthly subscription basis for the end of your life. Cancelling subscriptions is a complete nightmare, and deliberately so. Certain sectors of the economy benefit from conflict because of the wealth inequality picture. Small numbers of individuals have disproportionate influence and control. There have been a myriad of financial scams, and these are inevitably going to continue. So companies, surprise, surprise, routinely lie to you or hide the truth, potentially selling you things that are addictive and bad for you, either financially, mentally, or physically, potentially leading to death. So I'm sure there's a load of other things that companies do that are in service of increasing revenue that, morally bankrupt. Anyway, that's all I can think of for now. Here's some cost reduction things that they also do. So have you ever wondered why it's necessary to have a bank account in a country that you do no business in? I can only think of one reason. There's been a number of cases of exploitation in various different shoe manufacturers and clothing manufacturers, but I'm sure this is still going on, as is potentially lax safety standards. Again, somewhere in the supply chain you never see, but in some other country, out of sight, out of mind. Unquestionably, the oil industry particularly, but many other industries are doing environmental harm as we speak. I have no words for this one. Musk is trying to replace everybody with robots. Not necessarily a bad thing long term, but I'll talk about that later. And the European auto industry is responsible for circa 5,000 deaths annually as a result of cheating and emissions testing. And then obviously we've got denial of coverage and perverse spectre of the health insurance industry increasing profits massively because of a pandemic. Most of these things that are being done in service of increasing earnings are totally legal and encouraged implicitly or explicitly by shareholders who want to increase their earnings. And the whole thing sits in a kind of ecosphere of national bank, governments, financial institutions, and the stock market in its various weird guises. And then we get this sort of nonsense where the structure of the economic systems are open to abuse, manipulation, fraud, and ultimately losses to normal people. If we look at gas prices and look at how that's impacted inflation, well, first of all, you can see the direct link to energy. Now, the increase in energy prices previously was much less than the increase in gas prices, but in the last 20 years or so, you can see how the mix of sources of hydrocarbons for energy production has changed, which is why the impact on gas is now more significant to electricity. So natural gas also could use, not just in homes, and more so in the commercial sector and the industrial sector, to manufacture products. So there's a feed-through cost. Food prices also are heavily influenced by gas price for fertilisers and electricity that's associated with manufacture. So you start to ask the question, well, okay, why did the natural gas price go up so much? Why are we getting screwed by inflation? Partly because of that. And if you look at the data, it's well, there wasn't really a big difference in consumption, 21, 22, and you didn't come anywhere near running out of gas, and yet the gas price went up like that for no reason. So to reinforce the point, this is natural gas futures contracts. You can see an annual profile that goes up in the winter and down in the summer. And yet, if you look at production profiles and you look at costs, bugger all difference what time of year it is you manufacture the gas. It operates on the assumption there is a constraint to supply, and there isn't. So you get this sort of thing going on. And effectively, the natural gas market in the US, well, everywhere, is based on a principle that you wouldn't apply in McDonald's, which is if it's lunchtime and it's busy, we just charge you more. So if we take the usage of natural gas and multiply it by the average gas price during the 2 years that the imaginary inflation kicked in, the price got higher, but there's actually no reason for it to do so. You can see the cost to the US economy is roughly 170 billion over 2 years. Now, those costs will be multiplied up through the supply chain. The inflation that the UK saw as a result of natural gas price increases and Europe saw was significantly more in the US, and this is partly because CPI for the UK has got a larger component of gas, direct gas inputs to it, but also the fact that there were higher increase in the gas prices in the UK. It worked out about 70 billion over 2 years. If you look globally, you can see how this rippled through every economy in the world. So on the left-hand side are all the countries, and I've marked out the US, UK and China. And you can see which countries have been more exposed or less exposed to gas, really. What's quite terrifying about this picture is nobody actually ran out of gas. So as far as I could tell, they didn't. Nobody else benefited from this other than these people. So let me summarise all of that. The system that governs the way the economy works drives a set of behaviours that are not in the interest of society at large. The shareholders of some corporations tolerate or encourage actions that cause misery and suffering to many people, quite legally. System oversight has failed to prevent multiple scandals and further suffering. The net result of the way the system is set up is that it drives extreme wealth inequality. Whilst this is going on, and this is going on unnoticed, and this is somewhat convenient for those benefiting. Given all of this, it is difficult to see anything other than growing discontent, whatever the politics of who's in charge. The economic system of the last 50 years feels to me like an engine being revved to the point of destruction. It'll be very interesting to see if this analogy proves correct, and more importantly, what the mode of failure is. Good luck to us all. In the next video, I'll talk more shite about what all this means and where things might be headed. Thanks for watching.